So I had the opportunity to watch Oppenheimer in 70mm IMAX, and this movie absolutely blew me away. It was so well done. Just the way that it was shot was so aesthetic. I have a personal favorite Nolan film, which is Inception, but I would definitely put this in line with Inception, Interstellar, Dark Knight, which are my top three, I'd say. This movie definitely takes more of the Dunkirk route, but Christopher Nolan absolutely crushed it. It is really like an immersive experience. It doesn't feel like a film, it feels like VR, but on another level, because as Nolan describes it, it's like 3D without the glasses, or 3D without the glosses, you know, as he says it. Anyway, I'm gonna be giving a kind of review of this film, but more importantly, I'm gonna be talking about what I actually learned from Oppenheimer, from the way that the character was portrayed, and what I can take away from his story to improve my life and to help me personally to progress towards my goals and what I want to achieve. Now, I know this film isn't about a topic that we should rave about, that we should technically celebrate, because it's about the creation of the atomic bomb, which had a drastic impact on society. There's so much to Oppenheimer as a character, and Nolan really touches on all those complexities in this film. So I'm going to start off by doing a quick review of the film. I'm going to touch on the cinematography, the acting, and then the music in this film, the soundtrack, which I think is absolutely incredible. And then I'll talk about what I personally learned from this film and from Oppenheimer's story and the type of person that he was. So to start off, the cinematography of this film is absolutely gorgeous. It's so well done. I was like shocked by how good this film looks. And the cinematographer of the film is someone who's worked with Nolan in the past, really does outdo himself in this movie. Now, I know that cinematography is something that a lot of movies, have already standardized in a sense. I feel like a lot of movies have a set of shots that they kind of stick to, and they don't veer away from that as much. Like you have over the shoulder shots, you have opening shot, or a establishing shot of a location, whatever the case may be. But I feel like with Oppenheimer, the fact that it's shot with IMAX cameras and the way that they use those IMAX cameras to get up close and personal with capturing Cillian Murphy's expressions throughout the film, it's so unique, because you'd think that with an IMAX camera, you'd probably go for a big budget film that's capturing this ginormous, kind of massive, larger than life, out of this world experience for the audience to feel as if they're transported to this different world. And in a way, Oppenheimer does do that by making you feel as if you are in the early 1930s and the late 1940s with this film. But what it does differently is that it's used to capture more of these intimate moments with these characters. And even in Interstellar, when the IMAX camera was used to capture some of the emotional moments on screen, for example, when Matthew McConaughey was seeing recordings from Murph, and I forgot his son's name, but when he is out in space and he's looking back on 20 years of footage. I mean, that's an extremely, heartbreaking moment. But even then, I felt like what the camera was really capturing was that sense of distance from Earth, how far he was from his children, the vastness of space around him, the fact that, he was all alone by himself, and he didn't know if there was a chance for him to come back, to see Murph, if he would make it back in time. So in my opinion, it didn't seem to linger or focus as much on Matthew McConaughey's expressions as much as Nolan did in Oppenheimer, where he really had this camera just locked in on Cillian Murphy's face for a minute straight. And you could almost see Cillian Murphy go through portraying these different emotions, several different emotions within one shot. And that tells you so much about Oppenheimer as a person and what he was going through in that moment in time. And you don't need to explain that. So even though there was a lot of dialogue in this film, I really think where most of the storytelling came from was just looking at Oppenheimer's face. And I think that was such a beautiful choice to really keep the focus on Oppenheimer's expression, so you can really capture that idea of this subjective experience. Because even when other characters were introduced, I read some criticism after the film that some of the characters fell a little flat, they didn't seem to have much of a backstory. Well, again, that's not the point. The whole point is to look at it from Oppenheimer's perspective. You're seeing how he views all these characters, and that's why they seem kind of one-dimensional at times, and you don't really get a sense for, okay, well, why is this person acting in this way? What is the cause for why they're treating Oppenheimer in this manner? Or is it almost like Oppenheimer's interpretation of the event that the audience is seeing, right? So it becomes a little of a bit of a gray area. And I kind of like that though, because it's different from a lot of other films where, each character has their distinct roles, and then you kind of see as they come together and how they, interact with one another, and you have a greater appreciation for those interactions because you know what those characters have gone through. And I do love movies that do that, but I think this film really does a great job in keeping the focus on Oppenheimer throughout. And the way that it's shot really does demonstrate this. I also love the use of the black and white film in this movie. It looks so cool. I felt like I was watching a movie from the 1930s. It seemed like a really old movie, but it was almost like remastered in a way where you're experiencing it in real life, or you're watching a recording of Oppenheimer from that time, and it's just like an 8K resolution on an IMAX screen. That's how it felt to me, and I was like, this is so cool. Like, how many times do we get to experience something like this? How many times do we actually get to experience like a historic event filmed in black and white and shown in a way where it almost seems like we're watching a realistic recording like of that time period? I don't know, I just can't wrap my head around how cool that is. I know it's probably just like a nerd thing to be like, oh man, he shot with a black and white, IMAX film, whatever. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, yeah, I get it. Like, black and white IMAX film, it's like, okay, cool. Why would you want to watch a movie in black and white anyway? But I think just like understanding like the fact that we can do this in this day and age and like have the ability to recreate almost the same experience that someone would have if they were watching something in the 1920s, 1930s in black and white, or watching a recording of someone in black and white, and then us being able to experience the same thing but scaled up so that the quality is the same of all other types of media that we experience in this day and age. It's just kind of wild in that sense. Without a doubt, cinematography in this film is insane, and I definitely recommend watching this movie in IMAX or watching it in a movie theater if you can't watch it in IMAX 70mm. It's just one of those films you don't want to miss, so go watch it if you haven't already. But anyway, moving on to number 2, which is acting. I thought the acting in this film was also really solid. Everybody did a great job. Obviously, the standout of this film was Cillian Murphy himself. I've been a big Cillian Murphy fan since Batman Begins when he played Scarecrow. I thought he was such a cool villain. He just had this unique edge to him as a villain, which made him super cool to me. Like, as a kid, when I watched like Batman Begins, I think that was like, it came out in 2005, so I must have been like 10 or 11 years old. And that was the first movie I saw. Fun fact, I actually fell asleep in the scene where Batman catches on fire and then he's thrown out the building. I think Scarecrow, throws him out the building. I fell asleep. I remember falling asleep like at that scene for some reason. I don't know why. Like, I guess maybe I was just like super tired. I didn't have my nap time or something, whatever the case was. But yeah, I just loved Scarecrow as a villain. I thought he was so cool. And the fact that Nolan brought him back again in Dark Knight in the one scene when they're in the parking lot, and that's also the same scene where Batman's like, I don't have hockey pads or whatever. I used to do a better Batman voice, okay? I guess I'm losing my edge. But in that scene, especially when Cillian Murphy comes back, I'm like, let's go. I was like so hyped to see him. Like, he's just such a great actor. You can just see the emotions that he's portraying just from the micro expressions in his acting. That's like something that a lot of people like take years to master, and he's just been able to do it so well in every single movie. Now, all the other actors in this film also did a really great job. I really like Robert Downey Jr.'s character as Strauss. That was the first time that I saw him doing anything besides Iron Man, and I was a little skeptical at first because I'm so used to seeing him as Iron Man. Like, every time I see him, I'm like, okay, this is Iron Man. It's like one of those things where, even seeing Josh Peck in this film, I was kind of chuckling a little bit. I'm like, Josh Peck from Drake and Josh, like, I grew up watching that show, and it was so funny seeing him in this movie. But he did a great job too. Like, I think he did a really solid job. I think this was one of his first like big budget films that he was in, and I'm really happy for him. I think he absolutely deserves it. I saw like an interview with him about how he had to take this role extremely seriously. It wasn't like a typical sitcom where you can like, you can kind of like dilly-dally around. You just be like, yeah, it's just another day on set, just gonna have a good time. But in this movie, no one's probably like staring him down and be like, Josh, you must do exactly what I tell you to do. You understand? I don't think it would be like that exactly, but he has to step it up basically, right? Like, that's what Josh was saying in this interview. He's like, I really had to take this role seriously, and I really think he did. Emily Blunt, incredible. She's someone that I think does really well in these types of serious films where like there's like a layer of suspense that's tied into it, like Quiet Place 1 and 2. I really think she did a great job in those movies, and I wasn't expecting anything less than just a great all-around performance from her. And I believe Nolan took the inspiration for Kitty's character from the way that she was described in American Prometheus. I could be wrong about that because I haven't read that book, but I know that that was like the main source material that Nolan drew upon when making this film. So I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if he like really tried to capture those moments that actually did happen in Oppenheimer's life. And then there's so many other actors in this movie that, you know, I could talk more and more about, but I really like Rami Malek's appearance in this film. Even Gary Oldman was in this movie, which was really exciting because I always see him as Commissioner Gordon in the Batman movies, but it's always nice to see like the Christopher Nolan Avengers just coming back. Like it's so funny to see how Nolan sticks to some of the same patterns, similar patterns in his movies, but he still does a great job with executing them. I have no problem with them, like the Nolanisms. But again, since I'm a fanboy, like I just want more and more of that. And yeah, and I think he'll continue to deliver going forward. So I'm excited for what's to come. So finally, the third thing that I wanted to touch on in this movie is the music. The music, man, this is like one of the movies where I feel like the music just, it takes you to a different world. And I know you might be thinking, wow, that's so cliche, bro. Like literally everybody says that, oh my God, this song takes me to like a different world, or like something like that. But no, it's just the fact that he created the perfect glove-like score for this film where it just fits so well with the visuals, and it almost makes you feel like this movie can't exist without the music. Like it makes you feel like this music was going on in the background as Oppenheimer was going about his journey of creating the atomic bomb. Like I really can't ever see myself like watching the film without the score involved. Like it wouldn't make sense to me. And one of my favorite tracks from the soundtrack is Can You Hear the Music? And this plays during the first act, I'd say, of this film, where you can see Oppenheimer going through the phase of learning about quantum physics and like, you know, researching and talking to all of these different scientists as he studies at Cambridge University, and he's meeting like Niels Bohr and all these famous scientists that we've probably read about in school or heard about at some point. And you can just see like the sheer amount of like passion and like dedication that he has to his desire to learn quantum physics as he's, you know, writing and scribbling on the chalkboard super quickly, and you can see the music slowly ascending, and you hear like the just like the crescendo of the track as it's building up, and you can see Oppenheimer in the zone just like writing like all these terms and notations. And it's just really cool seeing him explain like concepts in this movie, because he shows these atomic like particles like interacting with each other. At least that's what I thought it was, or like showing like fission and fusion like happening at the atomic level. And he has these like cut scenes in the movie during like this first act that I was mentioning, as Oppenheimer is going through this phase of, you know, being a student and then slowly working his way up to like teaching a lesson like on isotopes or something, or I forgot what it was exactly. There's just so many moments in this movie when the music kicks in and I just got chills throughout my body. It was just like, I can't believe I'm experiencing this. Like this is so cool. Like I am so grateful to be here in this IMAX theater and seeing this. I feel like the score for this film should get an Oscar. You know, I'm not a big like film awards kind of person, but I feel like since Nolan hasn't gotten an Oscar yet, he should definitely get an Oscar. I think Cillian Murphy should get an Oscar for Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor I think should go to Robert Downey Jr. More importantly, Best Film Score should go to Ludwig. Ludwig, you deserve it, man. Tenet was really good. I really like Tenet's score. I didn't think it was exceptional. I thought it was really good, but Oppenheimer, I'd say, has an exceptional score. I honestly don't know if Hans Zimmer would have made a similar score to Ludwig for this film. Like, I have a sense that Hans Zimmer would have kept it very minimal throughout. But again, we won't really know, and I don't think we need to, because Ludwig absolutely killed this. He is a beast, and I can't wait to hear more music from him in the future. So after watching this film, I took like several days to kind of just think through like what I had experienced. And this film really did have a profound impact on me. I remember walking out of that film feeling pretty sad at the end of that movie because of what Oppenheimer had gone through. And it's really harrowing to think about, you know, the use of nuclear weapons and how devastating those effects can be for not only individuals, but for society, for the world at large. And I know that this film, you know, was created to talk about these themes. And I think Nolan did a good job in talking about both sides of the coin, like the actual events that took place leading up to the invention of the atomic bomb and the testing, and then, you know, after the aftermath as well, you know, talking about the downfall of Oppenheimer in the sense of, you know, how so many people almost seemed to have turned against him in a sense in exploring his moral conflict with the work that he had created, and it was a lot to think about. There's a lot to take from that experience, but I wanted to take a second to reflect on what I learned from Oppenheimer's character, and I found that there are three things mainly that I took away from, the way that Oppenheimer's character was portrayed in this movie. Number one was just the sheer amount of drive, inspiration, and persistence that, Oppenheimer has in the earlier part of the film before he gets to Los Alamos and starts working on setting up the Trinity test. In the first act of this film, I really feel like you get a sense for Oppenheimer's imagination, the amount of time that he spends just thinking. Like even late nights, you see shots of him in his bed, like he won't be able to fall asleep because he's just imagining different, combinations of different possibilities of what can happen if he does this, and this obsession, right? I think that's the right word that I would rather use here, is this obsession with becoming great at something. That level of persistence is something that I feel like I personally can take away from this film. I think it's really important to be somewhat obsessed with whatever you want to create or whatever you want to achieve. Because if you aren't obsessed with something, and again, the word obsession, people can take it in a way where it can be considered negative, because you're like, oh, okay, if you're obsessed with something, that's not a good thing, because you're trying to make this thing happen, you're trying to do this, you have this kind of desperate energy. And I understand the idea of obsession means to me that you focused most of your energy towards your goal. Most of your thoughts, most of your actions are aligned towards whatever you're trying to achieve. But I believe that the obsession to achieve something remarkable should stem from a place of genuine passion for whatever you're working on. So that even when you're in that process, when you're trying to do something and people may doubt you along the way, you should still enjoy that experience, at every point in time. In the earlier part of this film, you can see Oppenheimer enjoying it. Even as he faces difficulty, moves through it with stride, he keeps going. And I think Oppenheimer is an example of someone that he was mocked, he was laughed at, but he still kept going. He still believed in his vision, right? He was still obsessed with making this thing happen. And along with that obsession, there was also another aspect that I also saw Nolan depicting really well in this film, was his curiosity. He was just curious about how things worked. He didn't really know exactly how something could be built practically, in the movie, right? One guy I remember that he's working with is oh, you're big on theory, but you also have to look at how things can actually be constructed in the real world. But Oppenheimer is so fixated on theory because he's just curious about how things work. He's so interested in the mechanisms behind something, so he can break down this theory into all these simple particles and first principles, so that someone can actually trace it all back together and see how this system actually works, right? How everything is actually quite simple at the end of the day. And I think the most well-known theories and most well-known proofs are the ones that are truly simple at their core, and they're considered beautiful based on how simple they actually are. And this is where I want to touch on another point that I took away from this film, which is the importance of acting in accordance with your values and principles, no matter what. I think at this point in the film, you can see that this conflict begins to emerge in Oppenheimer's mind, this cognitive dissonance, because this idea of what's considered to be morally justified, starts to arise in his mind. He's trying to determine, whether or not creating this atomic bomb is something that is going to provide a net positive for society. And I think there are moments in this film where you could argue, well, he was all for it. He wanted to do it. He wanted to move forward with it, because even though there was a chance that he would create something that would kill thousands of people, again, it would still provide a level of protection for the United States. There's different ways to interpret it. I interpreted this as Oppenheimer performing something that's considered to be inauthentic in his nature, because he seemed to be at a conflict with himself, because he was veering away from his values and principles. At the beginning of the film, you can see that he's completely aligned. It feels like he's on this pathway towards making this dream come true, of going to the depths of understanding quantum physics at its core. But when the proposal to create an atomic bomb comes up, it's an exciting thing for him. But I think somewhere down the line, Oppenheimer started to feel that maybe this isn't actually in alignment with what I truly believe. But I'd say, at the end of the film, you can tell that he regretted creating the atomic bomb. It seemed to me that he was in this state of deep despair with himself, and this sense of, what have I done? What have I brought to this world? Was this really necessary? And maybe there are moments in our life where we do something and we regret it. And it's sad when we have to go through an experience like that, because at the time when we made the decision, we thought we were making the right decision. But then in hindsight, looking back, it seems like, well, maybe I should have thought through that a little more. That's something that I took away from this film. Certain points in life, it's really difficult to know exactly when you're kind of veering off your path. And what I mean by that, when you start to act in inauthentic ways, when you start to make decisions that don't feel right, that don't feel like they're close to your heart, they don't feel to be connected to who you truly are, and they seem to be in opposition to your values and principles. And anytime one experiences that, I think it's important to take a step back and to reflect on, wait a minute, let me take a second to decide whether or not, this is the right path forward. But on the contrary, a big thing that I found is that, oftentimes I tend to get stuck in this, analysis paralysis mindset, where I spend so long thinking about a decision that I never actually decide anything. And I just sit there. That's one end of the spectrum, but I think the other end of the spectrum is just doing something just because you don't want to necessarily take the time to think through what you actually want to decide. I think making a decision out of haste when you haven't given much thought to whether or not this is something that really resonates with you, if it really feels like this is your authentic self making this decision, or are you just making this decision because of something external? Maybe it's validation from someone or from a group of people, or it's because you want to be maybe remembered for something, and there's something within you that you feel like you can't fill up on your own, whether it's a lack of self-love or you feel like you're not worthy of something and you need to get something from the outside world to fill up your cup, right? And I don't know if that's the case for Oppenheimer. I think that's not something that we can really know for sure. But I think what I took away from that film was, this was a very big decision to decide to create this atomic bomb. He wasn't involved in the decision making for how it was used that caused him the regret, more than creating the actual atomic bomb. That could very well be the case. It's a very sad story because it's not necessarily his fault, because he did the work, he created this atomic bomb, but did he happen to know exactly how it would be used? Not necessarily, right? Again, if you create something with that much power, it's only a matter of time before someone, that doesn't have the best intentions gets their hands on something like that and uses it in a way that's not necessarily considered morally correct or responsible. And there's different arguments that one can make towards that. But I really think this idea of living in accordance to your values and principles is something that I took away from this film. The film itself, in a nutshell, is extremely well made, and it makes you think. And I think that's what I love about Nolan's films. I think it's a beautiful tragedy is how I would describe this movie. You can't necessarily say Oppenheimer is a hero, and you also can't say he's a villain, right? It's this gray area, and I think a lot of movies tend to typecast characters as being either heroes or villains. Well, in reality, no one's either a real hero or a real villain. I think people are a mixture of both. At the end of the day, there's a spectrum, and I think, as human beings, we should aspire to do right for this world, to do good things. But sometimes actions have negative implications that we don't foresee when we're going about doing something or creating something. But should that mean that we should stop ourselves from creating something that we think is right? I don't think so. But should we also take time to think through something that can have a large impact on the world, on society, on people? Like, let's take AI, for instance, right? It's a big hot topic that's being discussed. I'm not going to get too much into that in this video. I know I've already been recording for like an hour or something. But like the ethics surrounding AI, right? Like, that's a big topic that's going to be present in our lives going forward. There's so many nuances to every innovation, every technological discovery. And I really think Oppenheimer does a good job of painting that picture. And that's what I loved most about this movie. So those were my reflections, my thoughts on the film. And I am actually going to watch it again this weekend because I just want to completely geek out over the soundtrack and the visuals. And I can't wait to do that. So thank you so much for watching this video. This was not so much of my typical content, which is focused primarily on personal growth. I wanted to talk about this movie because I think there are a few things that I took away from this film that I believe that can help me in my personal life. And maybe you'll, take away something different from the film. And if you do, leave a comment below and let me know, what your thoughts are on the movie. If you have seen it, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for watching, and keep diving into flow. Peace.